Alright, hello everyone. Christmas is here. Well, it's a bit late for Christmas, but our Christmas present, Ghoda, is finally on the boat. We have just received spoilers for the last few cards in Ghoda, and I'm here to give a pack review of the entire pack. Joining me to do this review is Kester. Hi Kester, how's your day been?
Hi everybody, I'm very well. Looking forward to all these cards.
Yep. For those of you who don't know, Kester recently finished in the top 8 in the London Mega Store Championship, and that's a very big accomplishment, I must say. Alright, so without further ado, let's get some insight on the cards. We'll mostly be focusing on the newly spawned cards, but we'll still be doing reviews of all the cards. So let's start off with the Inert Fraction. We do not have any new cards for this faction. There's Ramujan Reliant and Street Magic, both of which I think are pretty nonsense cards, not very good. I guess, Kester, you agree with that?
Pretty much, like Ramajan is just one of those why does this exist cards. Street Magic is one of those where I guess you have it installed. You're like, this is a nice effect, but you can't actually justify putting it in a deck.
Yeah,
It's
not
just not worth the slot.
indeed. And Run Amok, I had very low. I didn't really like the card when I first saw it. Then I've heard from Tagore that you can actually use it like an inside job on scoring remotes, which actually looks pretty decent.
Yeah, so I don't know. This is one of those cards where we'll have to wait and see how it works out, I think. But I guess what I find interesting about it is sort of less than half a cycle ago, even the way you beat Anak was you gear check them early on in the game with pushing out agendas in like single iced remotes or however you could get them out early in the game, basically. And now you have Faust and you have DDoS and you have this card, which, as you say, you can kind of use like an inside job. You play it. If they res, you destroy the ice and run again. If they don't res, you get in. And it's like, how are you supposed to keep Anak out early game between all of those three cards? I just don't really know what the answer is.
Yeah, that's a very good point because it doesn't need to be a successful run, or you don't even need to break the ice, unlike with the cutlery. So yes, it is quite powerful. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's very hard to keep Anna out of your remotes now. Yep. And a very good list there. DDoS has been very oppressive, and there's blackmail if you're playing Valencia. Yes, there are a lot of ways that Anox can get into your remotes now, and this is yet another one of them. I'm not sure if it'll fit into any competitive decks. We'll just have to wait and see. Alright, moving on to Criminal. We have our first new card in the form of High Stakes Job, which is essentially dirty laundry on steroids. I think this card has a lot of potential, but I find it very hard to evaluate in a vacuum. What do you think?
So I think I agree. I think I've seen quite a few people who are very excited about this. I'm slightly less so, I think. It's to me it seems like it fits the same role for runner as restructure does in corp. Like you're not going to be able to take the money from this card unless you're already set up, you have a big amount of money, you have breakers installed, etc., etc. Um, and if that's the case, it seems like it's a card where it's hard to justify running three of this in a deck. I could see running one and being like, oh well, it's kind of economy once I get into the mid late game. Um, and of course, there's a lot of it's sort of cute plays you can make with this card where you can pretty much guarantee getting the money with, say, a count siphon and emergency shutdown and all these kind of tricks. But I don't know, they're not reliable enough that I see this as something you can stick three of in your deck and rely on for economy. And that's really what you want out of an economy card is you want it to give you money when you need money. You don't want it to give you money when you already have money and are set up.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You hit it on the head right there. It is a restructure more or less, but it's not. It's conditional. Um, yeah, I find although there are some pretty interesting things you can do with it, I also would like to compare it to Bank Job. Sometimes you use Bank Job to test remotes, like a single ice remote. You can just run in with a Bank Job. They are forced to rest the outermost ice on the remote. You could do the same for high stakes job, although you really need to have a way to get in, which makes it tough. You're absolutely right. It seems like a win more card.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good point. Like, you're absolutely right about bank job, but for 6 credits, it's very different to paying one. So,
Yeah, you must make sure that you can get through the server. Um, so some synergies that have been thrown out from what I've been reading are public terminal and Ken Tenma, which
uh-huh.
seems like a big deal. If you have Desperado and 3 public terminals and Ken's ability, you can potentially gain a swing of 11 credits for 1 card and a click. Of course, that's just the dream scenario. Um,
It is. That seems. I don't know. To be honest, I've not played enough Ken to be able to make sensible comments. But as far as I can tell, out of the criminal runners of all of them, he's the most sort of, I don't know, vanilla almost. He's just a pure economy runner. You get set up and you do efficient things. And yeah, this card is perfect for that kind of strategy, I guess.
yeah, and listening to that what do you call it? That podcast the deck building DRes. I'm not sure if you've watched it, but Dave Hoyland was on there once, and he built a Ken Tenma deck with Code Marvelous on the spot. Oop, oh dear. Um, yeah, basically Dave said that Ken is in a pretty good place right now because with Crims taking a hit from the most wanted list, um, in the form of Desperado, they are really starved for influence now, and Ken is the way to go. I mean, it's a pretty strong bet, because he has that 2 extra influence.
It's true. It's true.
Although, of course, I know he still loves his Leela a lot. Okay. Another interesting point is that this high stakes job can synergize with stealth builds as well because you are breaking ice for free. The problem with high stakes job is if the court reses the ice, you are paying money to break through the ice. Then your high stakes job is not worth more than a sure gamble, maybe even less. But with stealth credits, you can potentially make the run worth it and still get
Hmm.
access on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and probably the will be the place this is the most useful card.
Yep.
I guess it's also got a nice kind of thematic quality to it. The using the stealth breakers to do a high stakes job.
Very well said there. Alright, so we'll leave that behind and move on to Mongoose, which has already been spoiled. This is a killer. Um, it's not the best killer because it has that restriction of being able to only break 1 ice per run. But given that how starved Criminal is for influence right now, I can certainly see some decks swapping Mimic out for this. Would you?
I'm not so sure. I think if you look at a lot of the ice in the game, um, there's not that much you can break more efficiently with this than you could with Mimic. I mean, it's good against Kamainu. I think that's about the one ice where it has a better ratio than the Mimic. Um, and Mimic's only one influence, right? If it was more, I think there's a case for, I free up some influence by putting this card in instead, even though, it's slightly less efficient in a lot of cases. But when you can get Mimic for one influence, I don't really see a lot of criminals switching from the sort of standard Mimic with fairy support, which has pretty much always been their solution to sentries. I feel like this fills the fairy slot a little bit more than it does the Mimic slot. Because it's once per run, you can imagine a deck which uses Mimic to break any sentry below 3, and then you won't run into too many high strength sentries in a single run, so you can use this once to break whatever you run into. But as I say, I feel like Fairy does that job better. So I'm not quite sure where this is going to fit in.
Fair enough. Those are very good points. I've been trying to swap Mimic out because influence is really tight, but it is true, it's not very efficient, which is why I think high stakes job and the like have more place in new criminal decks. You really need a lot of money to break ice, especially since you don't have a good decoder already. Breaking stuff like Turing's and toll booths is going to cost you a lot of cash.
Mm.
But you might be right, Mongoose probably isn't what you want for a main breaker. If you do, you probably need 2 of it installed, and Crim has memory issues. A lot of problems with Crim.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see this, maybe being run as a one-off, but not any more than that.
Yeah, so all in
It's
all,
going
I
to be
think,
a support breaker more than anything.
yep, indeed. Do you think these two cards give much to competitive criminals?
Hmm. I think it's probably going to take more than this, right?
Yeah,
I think High Stakes Job is a solid card that's going to see play, but I don't, it's in the end, it's an economy card. It's not going to revolutionize the faction in any way.
yeah, agreed. Alright, so let's move on to Shaper, which got the largest share of the pie for this data pack. So let's start out with the two cards that are meant to be paired up with each other. We have Jess, the runner, who avoids the first tag during each run, and her corresponding console, Maya, which allows her to do fun stuff when accessing cards from R&D. I find Jess very underwhelming because she doesn't have enough support right now.
Yeah, I basically agree with you. I think she's going to be very solid against NBN for pretty obvious reasons. Half of their good ice is basically blank against her. But against any other corp, she's doing nothing unless you build around her. And if you build around her, you're basically making another Siphon spam deck. Just this time it's in Shaper.
Don't get me wrong, that's pretty strong. But two things, yeah.
It is
Firstly,
pretty strong. And
yeah, you lose a lot of influence. Account Siphon is for influence. And as you said, even though it does pretty well against tag NBN, it still doesn't avoid the strongest tagging tools, which are mid seasons and 24/7.
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I do find it very underwhelming. I've seen a couple of decks floating around where people try to make use of this, and I'm just thinking to myself, just swap the ID for Kate, swap the console for Astrolabe, and you've got yourself a better Siphon Kate deck.
That's okay. So I'm less sure about that. I've I think avoiding tags is incredibly strong, just because of some of the plays it opens up. Now, admittedly, it's only one tag per run, so you're only avoiding one of the Siphon tags, which does remove some of that stuff. But so, for example, back in Spin Cycle, I played for a while this Andromeda deck with New Angeles City Hall, which it wasn't an amazing deck, but when you play Account Siphon with New Angeles City Hall, you realize how completely obnoxious you can be when you can avoid tags, and it's the click saving that's the really big thing.
Yep.
So, you can have ridiculous turns where you do Account Siphon, play same old thing, Account Siphon, and you've got no tags at the end of it. And it's absolutely crazy. So I think I might definitely test out this idea with this sort of Account Siphon spam archetype. Particularly because I think it'll let you run both resources and still do quite aggressive Siphon spam, which is not something we've been able to do before, just because you have to spend so many clicks clearing those tags if that's something you want to do. But I'm not thinking it's going to be tier 1, but it's interesting enough that I'm going to try it out.
Yep, that's a very good point. It really is about the click saving. That being said, yeah, when you mention click saving, I can't help but to think of another shape ID, which is Haley, often touted as the click saving ID. But in reality, if she doesn't trigger, she doesn't trigger nearly as often as you like, and when she doesn't, you just wish you were playing Kate instead.
It's true. I think that's a reasonable comparison. I'm not quite sure. I think in the end, any card that's solely based around installing more stuff, like installing stuff as runner, does not win you the game. It helps you win the game, but you need to do something with that stuff. Yep. I think playing Account Siphon a lot more directly helps you win the game than installing stuff does.
Yes, that's a very good point. I have to agree with you there. Account Siphon is always very game changing. Hopefully she'll get more support cards in the future because it's
for sure.
Kind of interesting. What do you think of Maya's effect? I see it as a very nice way of accelerating your late game win when you have multiple R&Dis out and are just R&D locking for the game, because you can dig through R&D faster this way. I can't really think of any other good users of Maya. Do you have any?
So I agree with you about that. I think the ability is I mean, particularly if you're not playing Jesminder as well, taking the tag every time is just not really something you can be doing if you're running a deck that doesn't want to be getting tagged. And with the most wanted list, I think that's pretty much every runner deck because you have to run resource economy now.
That's true. Yep.
But on the other hand, a cost 3 console that gives you 2 memory is something I've thought Shaper has needed since forever, basically. I think if this had no ability, there would be decks I would play it in. So the ability is like icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned in that sense. But I think the sort of, the ability is not going to fire often, but having that pseudo imp there if you need it, I think that's pretty solid.
Yep.
The real question is this better to play than Astrolabe? And I think the answer to that is probably no in most cases.
To be fair though, you raise a very good point. The 2 memory is significant. It makes it much easier to play Magnum Opus, which is an economy card that doesn't require resources. So you can theoretically go for a Tag Me Shaper deck with Opus as your economy and just fire this as much as you like. I can
Yeah,
see that
you can. The other thing I wonder if it will open up is a return to sort of Catman style decks. I think they're probably not good because there's too much AI hate nowadays.
Yep, agreed with
that
you
I
there.
don't think you could really run that deck in a sensible way anymore.
Yep.
But it did always struggle with 5 memory, and I think that sort of shaper, like you say, like the Magnum Opus shaper, where you are essentially trying to build a ideal rig rather than just clone chipping or SMCing whatever you need at the time. Those are the decks that are going to want this kind of console.
Yep, agreed. And fantastic that you brought up AI hate because that's a good segue to our next card, which is Panchantantra. This card allows you to add a subtype to 1 piece of ice each turn. So the synergies with this are with tracers. If you add the tracer subtype, you can use gingerbread on any ice you want. Um, what else is there? AP and Destroyer for Sharpshooter and Deus Ex. So far, that's all we have. What do you think?
Um, I'm not so sure. I feel like this is one of these cards where it's a neat effect, but in the end, it will always get cut from the deck for something else. I think it's sort of especially a shame that it's coming out just as the most wanted list comes into effect. Because, I mean, you think there's only, I think, 3 breakers in the game which target subtypes that are not one of those 3. And that's Sharpshooter, Deus Ex, and Gingerbread. Now, Gingerbread is terrible. You're not going to play it. So the other 2, I can imagine you might produce some kind of deck that's based around recurring as much as possible Sharpshooter and Deus Ex, and using this to break basically whatever ice you want with them.
Yeah,
With Clone Chip now essentially costing an extra influence, it's pretty hard to justify using it on breaking any old ice with those 2 cards. I mean, especially when I think the ice you want to break with them are generally the ones they break anyway.
Yes,
you
that is
can't
quite true.
you can't make a deck that repeatedly breaks Curtain Wall with Sharpshooter using Panchatantra. It just isn't going to work.
Yeah, yeah that yeah I think this is the one that most janky players will try to experiment around with, but ultimately you're right. Either it requires you to do play a subpar breaker such as Gingerbread, or requires way too much recursion.
Yeah. It's also one of those cards I sort of slightly dislike because it's not. I don't think it's going to be a particularly playable card, but it leads to approximately 700 rules questions. I've already because you can give a card any subtype, right? You can just make up a subtype and give that to a card. I've already seen people saying, "Oh, you can give the HB Ice from Old Hollywood that trashes consoles. You can give it console itself and it will self-trash when that subroutine fires. Or you can run into a wraparound and make the wraparound a fractor." And, I just, those kinds of interactions I just find them too stupid. They kind of break the game a bit for me.
Yeah, that is That is quite true. I would be very surprised if the ruling went through to allow that, though.
I would be surprised too, but
That would be amazing. Reduce wraparound strength to 0 because you named it a factor. Wow. Didn't even think of that. That's good. Alright. Finally we have Artist Colony, which is, I think, a very powerful tutor. Of course, it comes at the cost of forfeiting an agenda, but obviously it's meant to synergize with Fansite, which conveniently is also in Fraction. This just screams very Shaper to me. You can tutor anything from your deck on the go. But the big question is it good?
yeah, we're gonna have to see. So talking about Fansite first, I was interested earlier today, so I did the maths quickly. So if you're hoping to get both Artist Colony and Fansite out on the board, on average you need to draw between 16 and 17 cards from your deck to have like a 50% chance of seeing both.
And that's assuming 3 copies of each in a 45
That's
card
assuming
deck?
3 copies of each in a 45 card deck. So you're already a third of the way through your deck by the time you've got the combo online. So, there's a 33% chance you've seen the thing you wanted to tutor already.
That's true.
So, but I don't know. I feel like that's more a criticism of Fansite than it is of Artist Colony. And, I think Fansite is just a bit too anything that you have to set up, and then the corp has to score an agenda, and then it doesn't do anything unless you combo it with something else, is always going to be in that kind of tier. Artist Colony, I really don't know what to make of. It's in the current environment with a lot of MBN decks around and a lot of MBN decks running News Team. I'm pretty tempted to just put a one of this in a lot of Shaper decks just in case I run into News Teams, and then I can just get rid of them.
Yeah, and with some IG decks playing Shikus as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well. That is true. I must agree.
It's the same as, you run Data Dealer and Criminal for pretty much the same reason. I've seen it as one-ofs in quite a few Criminal decks, just basically because of News Team.
I don't know. I think Artist Colony is way stronger than Data Dealer because Fansite is actually in Faction, so you get some mileage out of it even if you're not playing up against News Teams.
It's true. Like I say, I'd like to see how it pans out. I'm not convinced on the Fansite interaction, but like I say, I think as a one-of in a lot of decks, it's probably a reasonable choice. I think there'll actually be a lot of situations where you think, well, actually, I'm totally fine forfeiting an agenda for this effect. Maybe you have a 15 minutes, you've stolen from MBN, and forfeiting it is fine because they're going to take it away from you anyway. Maybe if you sacrifice an agenda, you will get to steal an agenda from a remote, and okay, maybe it's point neutral for you, but you're denying that agenda to the corp. And the fact that you can tutor literally anything at instant speed is, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's the main thing, because I think this is what will draw a lot of players, both, a lot of casual players, to be honest, because what I've observed is a lot of players seem to like to squeeze every single interesting card they can find from their collection into a single deck, which obviously is subpar, but with Artist Colony, you can justify it doing so. You can say, hey, if I need this tool, I'll just tutor it up. If I need a Plascrete against Wayland, I'll just tutor it up. It's very tempting to go down that route.
It's true. So I was actually sitting trying to think about cards which, they're not programs because obviously you can already instant tutor them as Shaper,
exactly.
Which you might want to do this with. And Plascrete is one very obvious one. This, if you have this on the board, it essentially says, you can't kill me with meat damage because I'm just going to pull Plascrete out of my deck.
Yep.
The other thing, which, maybe is interesting, but I suspect probably isn't, is you can now play, for example, the Source at instant speed and run that instead of Clot.
Yes, I was thinking of that too, and that actually works even against decks that don't run fast advance. It basically buys you one more turn to get that agenda.
Absolutely. And even against decks that play sort of never advance, like Food Coats, for example, forcing them to reveal when they're playing an agenda is a huge deal. So that kind of thing's pretty nice.
Yes, it
But
is.
in the end, I don't know. Like I said, you have to. I think to set this up, you have to already be in the mid game at least for this to be a useful card. You need to have played this. You need to have either stolen an agenda, which you're willing to sacrifice, or have scored a Fansite or a notoriety or whatever other thing you're running to try and make this work. And at that point, you're probably at least halfway through your deck and possibly more. And at that point, what is the chance that the thing you want to choose is actually still in your deck and is not in your hand or in your heap?
That is true.
And at that point, the sort of instant speed aspect of it becomes a little bit less interesting. You can't install things from your hand at instant speed with it. You can't install things from your heap at instant speed with it. So when you think about it, the criteria you need for it to be good are actually reasonably small. You need to have played this onto the table. You need to have scored an agenda or some agenda like thing. And you need for your thing you want to search to still be in your stack.
So basically, it's a tutor with a lot of prerequisites,
Absolutely.
which is pretty odd for a tutor.
Yeah.
Yeah. All in all, well, the instant speed aspect is pretty cool because another card that it synergizes with is Stim Hack, and it allows you to actually reliably bring out a card like Rachel Beckman, which you
Absolutely.
can't do right now. But otherwise, yes, you're absolutely right. It's a two-card combo tutor that requires you to be in the mid game, and yeah, but I think this card will be played by quite a few people, but I'm not sure how good it will be.
Absolutely. I'm expecting to see a lot of it, but
Yep.
I don't know how strong it actually is going to be.
Yep. Again, we can only wait to find out. Now, moving on to, shall we skip this?
Maybe.
I mean, no. It's an economy card, but I don't know what to say about it. No.
No, I've sat here trying to do the maths on this one, and again, I think it's so. The situations in which it saves you a lot of money are so kind of contrived that I'm not convinced it's going to be playable.
Yep.
You want to sit there clicking it for 6 or 7 clicks, and then you want to have a bunch of stuff that costs 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever to install, and it's all just a bit too. I don't know. Very specific things would have to happen for it to be a good money saving on just clicking for credits or playing Magnum Opus or even playing something like Armitage Code Busting, to be honest.
Yeah, even Armitage is just flat out better than this. I mean, how many programs are you going to install over the course of a game? And by the time you are done with this, your corp has already 4 points and an Astro token and waiting to win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, let's not waste time. Hasbaroid, the 2 cards that are already spoiled, are both pretty good. I can see them both going to food courts.
I guess. So Advanced Concept Hopper, it's a good effect. It's a 4-2. Who knows? 4-2s are not especially playable. I mean, in food coats, I guess, is probably a lot more the case than a lot of other decks, but I don't know. I think I'd still be willing to pay the 1 influence hit for a copy of NAPD over a lot of 4-2s, and that probably includes this one.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because the problem with food codes is if you want to still have the luxury influence for your architects, your Elis, and your hoppers, you have to give up at least 1 copy of Caprice, which greatly is a great hit to your consistency.
It's true, but
I still think it's a solid 4-2 if you're not looking to go on the never advance or fast advance plan with HB.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's probably the best 4-2 in faction. I think it's probably generally a bit better than Efficiency Committee is.
But you're right. I wouldn't run 3 copies of this.
It's just still a 4-2. That's the problem with it.
Yeah. I wouldn't run 3 copies of it in food codes. Yeah. It cannot replace Vitruvius or ABT. Vikram, on the other hand, is a pretty solid piece of taxing ice.
Yeah, I think the 6 res cost is going to be a bit more painful than it initially looks. But yeah, this is.
It could replace what used to be assassins or EG2s in your deck.
I think that's probably pretty reasonable. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. I think you're right. It's a solid piece of ice. The runner is going to have to break the subroutines pretty often. Um, I mean, Nexus Kate has become pretty popular as far as I can tell as the one of the main runner options post most wanted list. And if that's the case, I think this is probably not going to get played. I mean, two trace fours against a deck that regularly has Link 5 is not so great.
Yep, that is definitely not something to ignore. I'll agree with that. Similarly, it blanks out assassin as well. So
For sure.
yeah, you do
Uh,
have a lot less,
but
fewer
yeah,
choices.
against any duck that isn't some sort of weird link deck like that one is, um, then yeah, this is incredibly solid. Whichever way you choose to get through it, whether you click through it and spend your entire turn clicking it, whether you pay off the traces, whether you actually pull something out that can consistently break a Strength 5 Sentry, which is pretty tough. I think Atman 5 is about the only really reliable option. Then yeah, it's gonna cause problems.
Yeah. What really appeals to me is the fact that it's both a painful face check and something that you still have to break late game. The first subroutine cannot fire because you cannot. If you're relying on medium decks, you cannot use medium. If you're relying on your programs to break ice, you can't use those either,
It's
and
true.
you can't ignore the
Um,
brain damage either.
I think it's, comparing to say Itchy 1 or Itchy 2, it does slightly suffer in that once you're getting to the very late game where the runner is actually pretty happy to just get hit by whatever just to get into a server in order to score those last couple of points, this does essentially do nothing.
That's true.
Um, as long as they can break the first sub, they really don't care about the brain damage.
Yep, and it's
Um,
only just a click. Yeah, absolutely right. Still, these two are pretty solid HB cards. Nothing game breaking, but
yeah,
at least it's not coasters. Coaster material.
no, absolutely. Both solid, efficient cards that I'm sure will get played.
Yep. All right. Next up, Jinteki. We'll start with Heritage Committee, which is a new card. It's an alliance card that draws you three cards. Well, it has the same ratio as I've had worse, basically. Spend one, draw three, but now you get to add one card from your hand to the top of R&D. Bear in mind that this card that you add to R&D does not have to be one of the three cards you draw. So suddenly, a lot more possibilities are available. What do you think?
I'm not really sure what to make of this card. Um, as far as I can tell, it sort of seems set up to make weird, janky combos with things like mutate or accelerated beta test or accelerated diagnostics. Even um, the effect on its own, it doesn't really seem that great. The fact that you get rid of a card out of HQ is pretty irrelevant when you're going to be drawing it again next turn, and it's going to be vulnerable on top of R&D even before you draw it. So this is not a card that is helping you get rid of agendas out of your HQ when you don't want them or anything along those lines.
That's
Um,
true. I
it's I like I say, I'm honestly not quite sure what role this is supposed to play.
yeah. That I will agree with you from the perspective of RP, which is arguably the strongest Jinteki deck right now. Definitely don't have deck slots for this. That being said, it's actually pretty useful in flatline decks. I'm thinking of both Cambridge Personal Evolution and those IG decks because they both run snare. You can top deck a snare, so that's a starter. For IG, you often want to draw cards. A lot of clicks are spent drawing cards so that you can discard more cards to fuel your ID ability, and this helps a lot with it. I think if there's one place where this card can find a home in, it's IG.
Okay, that's interesting. So I've basically played no IG at all, so I wasn't really aware of that. But I
Yeah,
can kind of see that it makes sense if you're running a deck like that that does just want to draw a lot of cards, and then this, I guess, sort of helps make sure they're reasonable quality.
yeah. In the recent Steam Hack League, the top four for the Steam Hack League, Jinteki Steam Hack League, Dean was running an IG deck which really caught everyone by surprise, and it was surprisingly good. I
Mhm.
can definitely see this card going into that deck. He was drawing a lot. Another thing this card does, it allows you to keep R&D safe for one turn. assuming the runner doesn't have keyhole or any R&D multi-access. You top deck a non-agenda, and they can't get anything off R&D on that turn. Which is actually kind of a big deal, because as Jinteki generally you don't run a lot of ice unless you're playing Glacier. So that's another possible use for it.
Yeah, it's true. I hadn't really considered that. But R&D is certainly the weakest server for, for flatline decks out of Jinteki, certainly. In PE, generally the strategy is to try and take the points out of R&D and just ignore what's going on with the remotes until there's a actual genuine flatline threat from Ronin. And I can see that keeping the runner off of R&D for at least another turn while you can get set up is a good thing. That being said, I feel like the chances of the runner not having something like Maker's Eye or Keyhole or R&DI is pretty slim in a lot of decks.
Yeah, at least not today, with Shapers and ANRs running rampant. Have to agree with you on that one. Finally, it has to be mentioned that it's an alliance card, so I'm not sure which deck would like to splash 6 Jinteki cards. I can't really think of any, except for perhaps Titan Fast Advance with Trick of Light. Even that's a stretch, so I don't think we'll see too much of this splash out of action.
No, I definitely agree with that. It's very hard to see it going out of faction.
Yep. Alright, so we'll move on to the other card, which was already spoiled, Mumbat City Grid. I still think this is an overrated card. It has a lot of potential, but I think the amount of work that it needs to set up the combo properly is far too much, and it only protects one server by then. Do you agree?
I think I do, but I don't know. I was under the impression you were quite excited about this card, but I've obviously mistaken your views with someone else's.
That someone was Tagore.
Probably.
I mean, yes, it is possible. Construct a 3 ice remote, have Toll Booth outside, have a Mumbat City Grid inside, and force them to encounter Toll Booth 3 times. That's amazing. How much effort do you need to set that up? Good luck with that.
It's a lot of effort to set up, and it only works the once, because then your Toll Booth is on the inside.
Yep.
And the runner has to run the server twice more for it to be able to work again. So yeah, I'm not super convinced. I'm sure there is probably some combo or something I've missed here that I don't know. I remain convinced there's something I haven't thought about that you can do with this card that will be quite useful, but quite what that is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, the combo is probably with either Grail Ice or Komainu. You can just keep adding sub routines with each encounter during the same run.
That's a good point, and something I'd not considered.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that kind of thing where you're trying to kill the runner by adding subs, they can obviously just jack out.
That's true. Yeah. Yep. Very fair point. So ultimately, I think for competitive decks like Glacier RP, you're still better off playing Caprice and Betty, or even Ash.
It's pretty hard to print anything that justifies playing it over those two.
True that. All right. Moving on to yellow. They've got a lot in Data and Destiny. Here we don't see that much. Color Ghoda Real TV. Look at the top of the runner stack and perhaps trash the top card if you feel like it. Not a big fan.
No, like this is one of those cards where the effect is just never going to be strong enough to justify putting this in a deck. It's like if you were playing and this was on the table, you were like, this effect is okay. Occasionally it can be useful. But it's not useful enough.
Yep, agreed. It's like enhanced vision for criminal. I've heard so many people tell me, wow, this card does something new. And guess what? It's been at least a year and I haven't seen a single enhanced vision played against me.
No, for sure. It's always been very hard for me to evaluate those cards which kind of give you information but nothing material, as it were.
Yep.
So I remember playing back when Snoop came out. I remember trying to play that for a couple of weeks until I realized it was way overcosted. But it's actually quite an interesting card in that sometimes you would just have games where seeing the runner's hand would win you the game because you would know exactly what they were and weren't capable of. And while this card, Color Ghoda Real TV, is obviously never going to quite be like that. You're going to maybe see one out of every 2 or 3 cards the runner's drawing, if that. I don't know. It's an interesting space that I think hasn't really been explored in the game, that sort of knowing the information about what the other player has in their hand and has available. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
Well, to be fair, they have tried to explore that space. It's just that they are just so awfully underpowered all the time. There's Bug from Criminal, if you even remember that card.
I had forgotten that existed.
Executive Wiretaps, who plays that?
Yeah.
The other criminal one, the Schedule Analyzer. Yeah. Basically, it's interesting that you brought up Snoop because at least that does something to change the game state. You could potentially build a flatline deck around it by sniping the I've had worse or
It's
reducing
true.
the hand size. At least it does that. But for Kalagoda, I don't see that happening.
No, absolutely. This is not playable. I mean, trashing a card that the runner hasn't even drawn yet is not an effect that is strong enough to justify putting in a deck.
Nope. Alright, what about Interrupt Zero? Personally, I think this being at 1 influence is more of a Wayland card than an NBN card, mostly because NBN ice are usually only single subroutine. Whereas in Wayland, you can import this since they don't have good code gates. Now you have a very decent code gate that taxes a lot. It's especially good in Blue Sun because you can bounce ice around, meaning that the downside of it being position dependent is negated somewhat.
That's a fair point. It's yeah, not something I'd thought about with Blue Sun. I guess I looked at this and thought another positional code gate that is probably going to be bad because whatever's behind it is going to get parasited and then it does nothing.
Yep,
But
usually that's the case. And
yeah, it's a fair
especially,
point that putting this in Blue Sun may help alleviate some of that. And the fact that it has 2 subs and not just one, I think, is kind of definitely elevates it above the likes of Chum.
exactly. That was what I was about to bring up. You took the words right out of my mouth. There are lots of positional ice that do this. Chum and TLDR, they are both
Yeah.
1 to res, 4 strength, but only 1 subroutine. Inazuma is better, but it's 2 influence. So Interrupt Zero is at the very nice sweet spot. 1 influence, 2 subroutines. Pretty good. But as you said, there are a lot of things you can do to disrupt this. You talked about Parasite. There's also Nexus Kate, which you mentioned.
Oh, for
Bypassing
sure.
ice means that you don't use icebreakers. David means you don't use icebreakers. There are a lot of ways to get past ice these days, so
Uh,
perhaps it's not that good. You're right. Alright. Finally, the faction that needs the most help. Did they get the help? Well, they only got 1 card. It's Dedication Ceremony. Place 3 advancement tokens on a face-up card, but you cannot score that card on that turn. I don't know.
So this is kind of a strange card.
It is.
So there are 3 things you can use this with. You can use it with Advanceable Ice, which I think we all know what our opinions on Advanceable Ice.
Yeah, we don't have to go into a tirade about
And
that.
this one even has, it doesn't work with what are probably the best Advanceable Ice, which are the ones from Ordinary Chaos that become cheaper when advanced.
Yep, the space
So
ice.
because this has to already be rezzed, it has no synergy whatsoever with those ice. And at that point, you're looking at doing things like advancing Ice Wall 3 times for a single click with it, which is
too
not,
bad.
that isn't a totally terrible thing to do. I can imagine situations where that may be worth doing. I don't think they're worth putting this card in a deck for.
Exactly. Yep. You need to have more than just that.
It has a weird non-synergy with the face-up agendas in that it doesn't activate their abilities because you're placing advancement tokens rather than advancing, and those are agendas that generally aren't big, you're not desperately trying to score them. You're playing them because they give you stuff while you advance them. And again, this basically totally negates that. And at that point, why are you playing those agendas if you're trying to score them with this?
Yep. Very well said.
The one place I do think this is potentially interesting is asset play with assets that do stuff when advanced. So things like Grendel Refinery, like Reversed Accounts, like Ronin, like Contract Killer. You can do some interesting things with some of those by being able to fire them in the same turn you install them.
Yes, contract killer especially. Killing
Yeah,
KD Jones on in one fell swoop. That's amazing.
yeah. So Katie and Aesop, I can almost see this maybe being worth playing as a sort of one or two of in a deck that already has Contract Killer, um, which again is a sort of card that's solid but often doesn't quite make the cut. Um, the ability to just take them off the board is huge in some games.
Yep. At the end of the day, I really want to like it because it's one of those few cards that give you more advancement tokens than it costs you clicks to um, get those advancement tokens on. It saves you
For
two
sure.
clicks and 2 credits, which is not a small deal at all. But as you
Yeah.
said, it's very clunky. The situations where you want to use it are very fringe. Cards that you're probably cutting from your Wayland decks already.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are exactly as you say, there are various situations where you could use this card, but in none of them is it amazingly strong. This is not something like Oversight AI, where you play Oversight AI and Curtain Wall in your blue sum deck with no intention of playing one without the other, just because the combo between them is so strong. There is currently no advanceable asset that you can play this with that is so good that it makes it worth putting this card in your deck.
Yep.
Um,
As you said, the main attraction for this is the click compression, like Mushin. Uh,
for sure.
Once Mushin came out, suddenly you can threaten 6 or 8 net damage with Junebug. Same thing, you can suddenly threaten Connection Trash or 12 credits with Grindel Refinery in one single turn. Um, that's as much as you're gonna get out of it. Alright,
Yeah, I feel like certainly I've always felt like the most interesting of those advanceable assets has been reversed accounts. And I am interested to give this a go with reversed accounts. Just I think spending 3 clicks and a credit to make the runner lose 12 is a pretty good thing to do.
yeah, it is. It actually sounds pretty good. Can turn on seesaws and everything. Well, we'll see. But sadly, I don't think this is what. I mean, Wayland needs more.
No,
more.
absolutely. I think this is one of those cards where you'll put it in decks to try out because it looks like it could be interesting and then it will get cut fairly rapidly.
Yep. Alright, finally, the neutral cards. Last 2 cards, we have Mamba Temple. Mambat Temple? Anyway, apparently this is supposedly very good in Near Earth Hub, Fast Advance Near Earth Hub or anything to res pack campaigns, your cheap eyes and everything.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I feel like it's almost as strong as turtlebacks and those kinds of things in those decks. Just because of the speed it offers, really. Um, if you get one of these and a pad on the table, you can essentially res both of them in one turn for a net of 0. And then there are 2 assets generating you essentially 3 credits a turn, and the runner has to go and trash both of them, or just let you have all that money.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, nothing much else to say about it. Museum of History. It's quite interesting because with the most wanted list hitting, everyone has been scrambling to find the best tier 1 deck, and a lot of people have been saying that Noise is the least affected of all the runners. Well, as soon as that happens, an anti-noise card gets printed. But with a pretty big caveat, you need 50 or more cards in your deck. Is it a big deal to include 5 more cards in your deck?
I don't know. I'm not sure how big an effect this is. I think there are enough efficient, decent corp cards available now that if you really wanted to, putting an extra 5 cards in your deck would actually not be a big deal for a lot of decks. Maybe for something like Astrobiotics it would, but for Glacier decks, I think they're probably fine. They can find enough reasonable ice and reasonable agendas that are not significantly worse than the ones they're already playing, and put those extra 5 cards in. Whether this effect is quite worth those extra 5 cards, I'm a lot less sure about.
Yep, that's a pretty good shout. Glacier decks and slow decks like attrition decks. Those are the decks that really want to play this. But you're right. I myself can't really see if the 5 extra cards are worth it. Probably good as insurance against noise, but even then this can be trashed and yeah.
I don't know for sure. I mean, even then, I think Noise is not trying to win out of archives. He's putting stuff into archives because then you have to use your Jacksons, putting it back into R&D, and then he wins in the end game on medium runs. And that's exactly the same whether you're putting the cards back with Jackson or putting them back with this.
That's true. Mm, I-
It's I don't know. I think this card is just gonna people are gonna play it, and people are gonna play it in decks that are already slow and grindy, and it's gonna make a lot of people go to time in tournaments. I think that's gonna be this card's main contribution to Netrunner is making more games go to time because
yes.
if the corp is shuffling their deck every turn, and this is already lengthening the game by essentially adding to the size of the corp deck. It's I think the runner just has to go and trash it just to make sure they don't go to time.
Oh dear, that is what has Netrunner devolved into. Yeah, I really wish it was worded like Hades fragment instead. Just put it at the bottom of your R&D. But nope, nope. Oh well. So, closing thoughts on the pack as a whole. Personally, I think there's nothing game breaking in this first pack. Unlike with some of the other first packs, we have Jackson Howard in Cycle 2, we have Claude in Cycle 4. There's nothing game breaking in this, but there are quite a few power cards.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think it's an interesting pack. There's stuff in here that's certainly going to get played, um, and there's stuff in here which I think it's going to take a while to figure out whether it's actually a good card or a bad card, and those ones are always pretty interesting.
Yes.
Um, I think you heard earlier, like I'm not really sure I'm capable of evaluating, say, cards like Mongoose properly, and that's always interesting to do that kind of thing to pick up these cards which do something. Um, they fill a role that's a bit different to ones other cards already have. And I think that's particularly the case with the new Shaper cards that we've seen spoiled today as well. The ID and even the console, they do things that Shaper hasn't traditionally done. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yep. I love the new directions, and I love that there's a lot of problem solving to do. As you said, I can't evaluate them on face value either. How good will high stakes drop be? Who knows? I think it could be decent, but until I play test it, can't be sure. Anyway, I guess that will do. I think this video has gone on for quite a long while. Thanks so much, Kester, for joining me,
Well, thank you.
and thanks everyone for tuning in. Until next time, see you and happy net running. Goodbye.